Welcome back to War Thunder and welcome to the tank review on the Leopard A1A1, which is the last German medium/main battle tank at rank 5 with a battle rating of 8.0. I think there is so much to talk about this tank to understand it, where its strengths and weaknesses are, because the stats don't tell you the full story. And to let you know what you can expect in this video, I just give you a kind of a short introduction. Now, first of all, I will talk about the armor, then the interior, then obviously we'll talk about the mobility and we'll compare it to its main opponents and predecessors on the battlefield. And I will also teach you all about there is to know about the gun, and we'll compare those stats to its main opponents on the battlefield. And then at the end I will talk about my experience with this tank, its strengths and weaknesses. I will tell you how to play it effectively and also how to take it out effectively on the battlefield if you have no interest in playing this tank. So the Leopard is also, before I begin with all that, I have to simply tell you this. It is the creator of kind of a problem within the German tech tree, and we have this problem at lower battle rating already, but kind of reversed. And I'm here talking about that the Leopard 1 and the Leopard A1A1 practically are one tank. There is not too much significant difference, and its predecessor, the Panther 2. And we have this situation right here at battle rating 3.3 with the Panzer 3M and the Tiger H1. There is no transition tank, and the battle rating gap is big. Nobody teaches you how to drive the Tiger H1. And while overall the tanks are in their main design not too different, the gap between the performance of the Panther 2 and the Leopards, especially with the gun, are massive. And not just that, also the meta of the game completely changes. You get from this nice 6.7 battle rating kind of battlefields thrown into top tier immediately without any without any tank that sits in between, that kind of is a child of those both worlds, with the old kind of German tanks or the old-fashioned Second World War era tank and the post-war Bundeswehr tank, so to speak. And I think there is such a big gap in the performance, which is unprecedented in any other nation. And so this might teach you or tell you where the problems for players that don't play War Thunder that much come from. So, but I think that's enough of introduction. Let's begin with the armor review. As usual, when I talk about the armor and all the statistics about the tank, you will see some gameplay footage in the background. The first match is one match in arcade and the rest will be about realistic. So, the armor on the Leopard is quite interesting, especially the A1A1 is kind of a retrofit with additional armor. However, the big weaknesses of these tanks are not really covered. The lower plate, just 50 millimeters, effective thickness, depending on the angle, from somewhere between 80 millimeters to 130 millimeters. Yeah, you will get picked off by everything, even AAA. The upper plate is actually stronger, 70 millimeters at 60 degrees of slope, depending at the exact angle that you look at, ranging from somewhere between 140 millimeters to just 100 millimeters. You have additional tracks of 20 millimeters, so you can go up to 170 millimeters of armor, and the angle actually might be able to ricochet some conventional armor piercing or low penetration APHE shells. But against heat and APDS it's not really that good. Although Hesh might not go through this because it's additional armor, but I'm not sure, it might be just the unreliability of the Hesh shells. Then the sight is very similar to the Leopard 1. Overall, the tanks are obviously pretty similar. You have 30 millimeters of side armor, you have some additional road wheels, you have these side skirts, but they are not too useful, to be honest. So you can still get you still can get killed by the 14.5mm machine guns on the T10M and the Su-122-54. Up to 300 or 400 meters. The upper part 35mm, a bit sloped, but not exceeding 45mm. The rear of the tank as well 25mm with some additional parts, but you know, it's very thin. The rooftop just 15mm. The front is 30mm, that's not too bad, and the roof of the turret ranges from 33 to 20mm, so it's not extremely vulnerable from the top, but it's really not armored as well. Then we come to the turret, and the turret is where the significant changes to the A1 are in terms of additional armor. Now there is this additional 35mm of armor and 10mm at the side, 20mm all around the tank, at least at the front, and the rest is covered by 10mm spaced armor. But behind that is still the normal Leopard 1's armor, and yeah, it's not really thick. Also, those rangefinders count to the damage model, so you can get picked off by even low penetrating AAA from the front partially. Then also the rooftop is not really that big. There are no significant overlays that might stop a shell, especially with patch 1.63 we saw the 30% interaction rule. So if a shell is 30% larger than the thickness of the armor plate, not the effective thickness, it will have a very reduced chance of bouncing. So, and that makes it very hard to angle thin armor to such a degree that it will actually absorb any kind of proper tank shells. So the armor is not too good, but on the other hand, it's not really, you know, a walkover for any AAA. Your main opponent on the battlefield is the ZSU-57 2, and it is very unforgiving. It's the Russian counterpart to the Leopard. And then we come to the X-ray, and we can see that we have 4 crew members, and we actually have the design of the German tanks significantly practically flipped around. First of all, the driver, the gunner, and the commander are all on the left hand side when you look at the tank, with the loader being lonely on the right hand side. And then we can see big ammunition racks all around the tank, and you have 60 rounds in total. Now you can remove all but 43 shells. This is a 40 rounds ammunition rack at the front, very prominent, and this also gets emptied last. And those 3 shells, you can also keep them in the tank. Important is that you remove those 3 and those ammunition racks here. Now that gives you a slightly better survival rate, but there is also the engine together with the fuel tanks and the radiator and the transmission, and they just love to blow up, especially when get shot at with heat or APHE. So that's the interior done. Now I think it's time to just simply talk about the mobility. And the mobility overall, at least theoretically, is highly impressive. Now, when we leave the Panther II aside, it has the strongest engine with 830 horsepower, and it is the 3rd lightest tank in this comparison after its predecessor, the Leopard 1 and the T-62, with just 42.4 tons. The horsepower to ton ratio is the 2nd highest with 19.6. Just its predecessor is slightly better with 20.8. And also the Panther II is kind of hot on the heels with 19.1. All other medium tanks or main battle tanks have way lower horsepower to ton ratio. Then the top speed is, at least on theory, the highest with its predecessor with 65 kilometers, and certainly the reverse speed is really great with minus 25 kilometers an hour. That must be one of the fastest reverse gears in the game, after, I guess, the Jagdpanzer V5 and the Raketenjagdpanzers. and because I think they go up to minus 70 kilometers an hour. And also it has some neutral steering, but there is one extremely big difference between the stock Leopard and a fully upgraded Leopard. A stock Leopard feels extremely sluggish, heavy, uncontrollable, and just doesn't see its top speed. Like the normal fully upgraded Leopard and its predecessor, you struggle to get even close to your top speed. You never see it. When you go like with 40 kilometers an hour, 50 kilometers an hour at best with a long run, and just in city combat you actually come close to your top speed. But we will later on see why city combat is not the best of situation that you can be in. Now let's talk about the business end of this tank, and that is practically the main selling point. And as we can right away see here, there is a lot of green stuff, and the stats are completely identical to its predecessor, the Leopard 1. The Leopard A1A1 features a 105mm L7A3 gun, which has a total shell amount or capacity of 60, which is on the higher end. The reload in this comparison, compared to also the top end main battle tanks in the game, is by far the fastest, with 7.1 seconds for an A screw. That is really fast. It's certainly better than the Panther II, and also the M60A1 is beaten by 1.2 seconds, and even the Chieftain, which has a ridiculously fast reload for its 120mm gun, gets beaten by over half a second, and the T62 gets left in the dust with a reload difference of over 40%. Also, the turret rotation speed is by far one of the fastest in this comparison with 22.6, same as the predecessor, and just the Chieftain and the M60A1 get close in this comparison with 21.1 each. The gun depression is with 9 degrees actually very good, but not as good as the minus 10 degrees of the M60A1 and the Chieftain. And also the gun elevation is the best in this comparison, together with the M60A1 and the Chieftain. So the gun behaves really great. Before we go to the ammunition types, there is one very specific reason why I picked the tank review on the Leopard A1A1 and not the first one, because I already did the tank review on the M60A1, and the M60A1 is also very similar to the normal M60, and together with the Centurion Mk, they have all the very same problem. That is a relatively slow vertical gun correction speed, so to speak. Basically, when you are on very hilly terrain with a lot of dips, a lot of ups and downs, it takes precious moments to correct the gun sight on the vertical, and that kills you very often, especially in close quarters. This is not the case with the Leopard A1A1, and it feels so much better than all the before mentioned tanks, and that just gives it so much more flexibility, and it really compensates more than enough for the slight lag in mobility compared to its predecessor. So then let's talk about the shell types, and the first shell, the DM13, is also the only stock shell that the Leopard A1A1 together with its predecessor has access to. It's an APDS shell, and normally I like APDS shell, but this APDS shell seems to perform very underwhelming. I might have mentioned it in previous tank reviews. I think this is one of the most unreliable shell types in the game, especially at high tiers. It doesn't seem to cut it. But the stats are all not that bad. For example, 1,478 meters per second muzzle velocity. That's not too bad, to be honest. 303 millimeters of penetration. Good performance against sloped armor. Retaining of the penetration at long distance. It all seems to be right there. But in the practice of War Thunder, I think this is a really unreliable shell, and it's, in my opinion, really painful to rely on it as your main shell, especially when you're stock. But at the end of the day, I highly recommend to always have a few of those APDS shells with you, as the two other shell types that you have access to are not that great against objects, or when you want to fire through a let's say a few bushes, a few trees, or through wooden obstacles. You can't do it with the other two shell types. And to have a few shells as backup is not that bad. The second shell type is the first researchable shell, and it is the DM502 hash shell. It features 145 millimeters of penetration, and that is 5 millimeters less than the British hash. And also the muzzle velocity with 730 meters per second is around about just half of what you get with the APDS, so it's rather bad to aim. But it seems to perform really well against Russian sloped armor. However, there were also a lot of incidents where I say that this shell is not really reliable, especially when you hit spaced armor or additional armor. The total effect of the shell gets absorbed. But if you want to know how hash works, I have made a ammunition guide early on in my YouTube career, so to speak, so there you can look it up. I might give you a link in the video description. Overall, I think, as you could see in the arcade gameplay where I tried it out against the side of a King Tiger, I needed 3 very good hits to actually knock out a King Tiger. Against Russian vehicles it might perform better, but I don't really rely on the hash shell, I rather rely on the heat shell. And the heat shell is really what makes this tank work. The DM12 Heat FS shell features a penetration value of 400 millimeters at all distances and performs very, very good against sloped armor. There is practically no shell type that performs better. Also, the muzzle velocity of 1173 meters per second makes it really great to aim. Not that good in comparison to the APDS, but still not bad either. And with 400 millimeters, it is the second strongest Heat FS shell for a tank, just surpassed by the T62's Heat FS shell and all the ATGMs. So that's basically it with the overlook of the ammunition. Let's have a look at the comparison of the shells. And there we can see that overall the ammunition on the Leopard is not that bad in comparison, at least the overall shell selection. The APDS that the Leopard has is rather on the lower end, because the M60A1 and also the Chieftain, as well as the upgraded shell on the T62, are better. But the muzzle velocity is kind of acceptable. Just the T62 has a much better shell velocity. Then for the heat shell, we can see that the muzzle velocity is, together with the M60A1, the highest by actually quite a bit. The penetration is kind of average, because the T54-51 has just 380 together with the M103's heat shell, but the T62's heat shell actually has a better penetration with 440 mm, as mentioned before. But the shell velocity is by far the best in this comparison. Then let's come to the hash shell, and we can see that in comparison to all the other high explosive variants on the main battle tanks, it has the second highest penetration with 145 millimeters. Just the Chieftain has more penetration with 150 millimeters of penetration against all distances and against all angles, and the Chieftain suffers for it by having a really slow muzzle velocity of just 670 meters per second in comparison to the M60A1's and the Leopard A1A1's 730 meters per second. But those two shell types are significantly slower than the Russians with 880 or 905 meters per second respectively for the T54, 51 or the T62. So you can see overall you have a good package of ammunition, and it's very modern ammunition. And as I mentioned it before, you don't have any kind of APHE, and in many situations you really miss the APHE. Very often when I played the first Leopard in arcade, I thought to myself, I would have killed that guy with APHE. And while many players say that you just have to aim for Amorex, even the heat together with the APDS and also the hash shell don't really reliably work against Amorex. And when you don't kill the gunner, the return shot, especially from Russian vehicles with their, let's call it, outdated APHE ammunition, they will one-shot you, and that is highly frustrating. This tank is really unforgiving. And here we can see a really nice example of the frustration that from time to time you can experience when playing this tank. Watch this. I hit the ammunition perfectly on. The T-32, one of the tanks with the lowest rate of fire for its caliber, and I cannot reload fast enough. And watch this shot. Look where he penetrated me in the kill cam. Over penetration works on this tank. So at this point I will show you a battle on Hürtgen Forest, and this will be, I will not spoil it, but this will be an awesome battle to watch, and it's kind of symptomatic when you face the enemy under really good circumstances for you, but also kind of challenging circumstances. I'm just saying that the sun was really blinding me in this battle. However, let's just summarize the Leopard A1A1. Together with its predecessor, it has the best gun handling stats. It has access to some of the best ammunition in the game at higher tiers. Well, that is kind of debatable. I miss APHE shells for the side shots, to be honest. On the other hand, it also has the best horsepower to ton ratio. It has on paper the best top speed. It has one of the best reverse speeds in the game. So everything seems to be alright. And again, I have to say it to you right here. Don't be fooled when you get this tank, because this tank, together with its predecessor, are completely different tanks to what you are used from the German tanks so far. German tanks before the Leopard, they were known for their rather big guns, or, you know, devastating firepower in terms of damaging effect, and also the survivability together with the armor, especially on the King Tigers. You know, they can really take the punishment. The Leopard plays completely different. The gun behaves completely different. The options that you gain are massive, but there are a lot of options that you also lose in return. You really have to adopt your playstyle, and especially when the tank is stock, it is highly frustrating. The APDS is highly unreliable in my opinion. Opinions might differ here, but my experience with that APDS was never really good, unlike any other APDS in the game, which I actually like. It seems like this shell is deliberately made in a way, or implemented in a way, that the damage output is not great, and also the bouncing chance is unnaturally high for an APDS, especially when facing Russians. And I think then we have here this prime example of a really ideal match on Hürtgen Forest for the circumstances. It is hilly terrain, it goes uphill, where there you really make the difference as a Leopard. On flat terrain, the difference is not too big. There is a difference, but especially when being stock, you often get baffled how many tanks will overtake you. When fully upgraded, it is a completely different matter. And when we talk about this part of the argumentation, so to speak, this might be one of the biggest difference between the previous German tanks and then this tank. Previously, German tanks such as the Panther II, such as the King Tiger series, even to a certain degree the Panzer IVs and the Tiger Is, they didn't require any kind of real upgrade for their firepower overall. The first shell, the stock APHE shell, was all that you need. On this tank, you need the heat shell to, get the strike on the enemy first to really cripple them. And after that, you have to reload to overcome their crew replacement speed and to aim for the killing shot, so to speak. Ammo racks, fuel tanks, the last crew member, whatever. But this tank is also not cheap to run. Every heat shell costs around 1,600 or 1,400 silver lines. It's really not cheap. So yeah, this tank really costs you a lot of silver lines to run effectively. And again, this tank sacrifices a lot of the armor. It is the weakest armored main battle tank, so to speak, in the comparison of the top tier medium tanks or main battle tanks. And it sacrifices all the armor for speed. In city fights, the speed advantage is there because you have hard terrain. But, on shortcuts, you have the edge and maneuverability. But what can you do when there is a T-54 or a T-62 sitting in the cap circle aiming at the corner? You never can take the shot. You can play the game of taking the hit in a German tank and another German tank, such as the Panther II. I do not advise it, but it is a possibility. Same goes for the King Tiger series. King Tigers are notorious for taking damage. The same goes for Russians in terms of that the armor really saves them, especially from the stock shell. And in this respect, you have to prepare yourself to play really around the objective. And that comes in with the next problem that the Leopard has. It is the backbone of the German high-tier tech tree. That is the problem of the Leopard. The Leopard would be amazing as a pure support tank, as a pure medium tank. In this respect, it might be the best tank in the game, truly. On the other hand, there is no real heavy tank that can push the middle of the map. Yes, there is the mouse, and believe me, I love the mouse. I think the mouse is a tank that you can really make work, but there are so many things that you have to know, and you still can get one-shotted in return when you are sitting in the mouse. It's relatively unlikely compared to other tanks, but it's still a possibility. And so the Leopard has to do literally everything. It has to go for the objective, but on the same time it has to secure the flanks, and it has to deal with other tanks of other nations that try to flank. And in a head-on engagement, this tank might be, in comparison, even fully upgraded, one of the worst. And there are a lot of triple A's in the game that can kill this tank from the front. Especially the ZSU 57-2 is notorious for hunting down Leopards. So while there is at the moment, technically speaking, the biggest variety in the German tech tree at higher tiers, in practice you just see pure Leo teams. Sometimes there is one or two mouse, but then there are in bad circumstances. Like on this map, a mouse would arrive right now at the top of the hill and the battle is over and it can't really do anything. And then we live in times of ATGMs. And again, as much as I love the mouse and as much as the mouse might have the best survivability in the game, ATGMs just simply play by different rules, which is kind of sad in this respect. Now, your opinions on if ATGMs are balanced or not might differ, but I think they render the mouse armor kind of irrelevant. It still can shoot back, and when the mouse hits an ATGM, the ATGM is dead, even the IT-1. I think the mouse is specifically designed to counter an IT-1 on open field. But again, the IT-1 can go hull down, so to speak, or hide its overall tank, and just you can see the gun or the rocket. And then you have the problem that you have the least or the longest reload with the mouse, with overall the worst penetration. Just the damage effect is the highest. And yes, there is the secondary 75mm, but on long range engagement it's not really that useful. But back to the Leopard. That is kind of the problem, and there is this big difference between your first experience when you get this tank and you don't throw money at it, and what you can see very often on YouTube. And why is there this big difference? Well, way too much performance is hidden in the upgrades, especially in the mobility department. I cannot tell you how slow and lumbering and sluggish this tank feels when stock in comparison to being upgraded. It is a massive difference. And what you can see here is a nearly fully upgraded tank, and that is under ideal circumstances, facing the Russians, surprising them, outflanking them, repositioning myself all the time, not really trying to take the shot. Okay, the Shilka was kind of an exception, but now I go into a bad situation and we will see how it ends up. That the enemy team is again capping A, and that is the problem. When a Leo team begins to fall, it is very hard to come back. And patch 1.63 actually made an improvement, as you have with the Leopard A1A1, a backup Leopard. So you can spawn with 2 Leopards, but there are more or less identical tanks. The firepower is exactly the same. The survivability is exactly the same. The maneuverability is nearly the same. In comparison to other tanks, there is no real big difference. And what Germany is really missing is a heavy tank with a decent speed that also has firepower. Ideally, in my personal opinion, the best that Germany could get would be like an E75 or a upgraded with a different turret equipped E100. I have the E100, I love the E100, but the turret is the same as on the mouse, more or less, the turret front at least. And that is just simply a weakness, that this tank has the weaker turret of the 2 being built, together with the mouse by the way, and also has an armor quality reduction factor. That is kind of historically accurate to a certain degree, but it's again kind of the implementation of reality that we don't need in the game, especially in times of ATGMs and post-war ammunition beginning from the IS-2 mod 1944. So you kind of see where the Germans lack. And look at the speed again here when I go down hills. I never see the top speed of 65 kilometers an hour. 50 kilometers is all that I do, so again the speed is artificially nerfed. Overall, the speed is higher as on any other tank, but it is very often, especially stock, not even close to being enough to get a position advantage over your opponent. Hütten Forest again is the ideal match in this comparison, as it really has a long run where you don't have to stop and look around if you can pass that, and it also is going uphill, where there the Leopard in comparison to other tanks has a advantage thanks to its horsepower to ton ratio. So it's not really the top speed that is the decisive factor. It is the overall speed, and in this respect, yes, the Leopard is one of the best, if not the best high tier tanks. Now, again, I might have mentioned it numerous times, the Leopard is kind of versatile. Yeah, so serving as AAA, why not? I think for every American tank driver that suffers with the patents, you kind of have the same theme here. The tank is not that great or borderline useless when being stock, and test it yourself if you don't believe me. But when fully upgraded, or at least when having all the gun upgrades, it can do the job. It certainly has some of the best stats in the game, undeniably. And in certain situations, it feels like this is the best tank in the game. But put it in other circumstances, like here, I know that there is a ZSU-57 behind this bush. I can't fire through this bush because it would absorb the heat shell. And so I have to expose myself, go forward to have a clear line of sight. And that also brings me to the big difference between arcade and realistic. This tank is not that great in arcade, despite what you saw in the first arcade gameplay. That was the most exceptional game that I ever had, and I spammed the heat shells like crazy. I had a superior position with clear lines of fire. I put the enemy in a crossfire. And again, I was fully upgraded with the best kind of ammunition, so keep that in mind. And, you know, Heat and Hash have practically the best kind of performance in realistic, as there is a clear line of fire. In arcade you have the spotting mechanic with the red boxing, and that is not a bad thing by itself, but it gives you simply the option to fire through bushes and trees because of the aiming assistance. On the other hand, then your shells will get absorbed. So how to play the Leopard is up to you. I think I mentioned all the stats. I gave you a good comparison. I showed you really good gameplay, and at some points there is always a bad ending. Now this battle was really great up until this point, and I didn't blow up this IT-1, which cost the Panther II the life. And another IL-28 took revenge for his brother that I shot down. And that's basically, that was the match. After that I couldn't come back. I had nothing else that with a decent speed to come back. And the Russians just overran us at that time. Again, this tank is really unforgiving, and then when you have a good run, there is always somebody in a plane that bombs you, and then at that time there is no AAA around to save you. Now, how you think about the meta of War Thunder, or if you think it is balanced or not. Again, let's come back to the patterns. The patterns overall have also really good stats. They are nimble, fast, small, and they have fast firing guns in relation to other nations. But without the heat shell, they are useless. They have one advantage though, they have APHE for the side shots. So, and when they are fully upgraded, they have a lot of potential, and they can strike hard. However, they also struggle with their overall survivability. Again, the Russians just need to make one shot. Now, I think at this point I have to really cut it. We're approaching nearly 40 minutes, and there is so much more that I could talk about certain situations. I could give you dozens of multiple examples. The simple truth, so to speak, is do not really go for the objective initially. Try to first dilute the enemy team, so to speak. Try to kill the enemies. Focus on the heavy tanks, as in the current meta of the game they can't respawn really that much if they haven't done anything before. And you know, whittle down the numbers, and then you have to go for the objective. But that takes teamwork, it takes communication. You very often have to throw overboard your knowledge that you acquired with previous German tanks. So please keep that in mind. The Leopard is a completely different tank design and tank approach, and it took me a while to get grips into it. And it also took me quite a few golden eagles to spade certain upgrades, or to get certain upgrades. And in this respect, I just can tell you, the Leopards can be fun. It can surprise you, and it can surprise the enemy. But by now, people really have learned how to take on a Leopard. Push it in a direct head-on engagement, and it very often comes off second. And when you're second in a engagement, tank versus tank, you're likely to die. So, let's just round it up with this battle scene here. I looked around where that ZSU-57 is. He was not there anymore. I thought he would retreat. But he was behind the building where I didn't look, and one single APHE shell was enough to kill 3 out of 4 crew members. So that's the tank review for today. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I could teach you a little bit. I hope the gameplay was good enough to show you the strengths and weaknesses of the Leopard. Let me know in the comment section if you have additional tips and tricks. What is your opinion? What is your experience with this tank? And is the stuff right that I talked about in terms of completely new experience, completely new game style and gameplay? Anyways, yeah, give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we will see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.